In a lawless land where the sound of boots on dust heralded danger and every corner hid an ambush, a young man with a smooth face and cunning eyes became the most wanted man in the Old West. He was Billy the Kid, the outlaw who challenged sheriffs, intimidated gunslingers, and entered history as an unbreakable legend. But who was this boy? A bloodthirsty villain or merely a survivor in a brutal world? Today, we will uncover the life and myths of Billy the Kid, separating the facts from the fictions that transformed him into one of the greatest icons of the frontier. Close your eyes and imagine we are in 1880 in the heart of New Mexico. The wind lifts the dust from the roads as armed men cross the small town of Lincoln. Amid the tension, a name is whispered on every corner: Billy the Kid, the young man who always seems a step ahead of his pursuers. His life was filled with twists worthy of a movie script, spectacular escapes, epic battles, and deadly confrontations. But who was, in fact, Henry McCarty, the boy who grew up to become the legendary Billy the Kid? This is the story you are about to discover. Although he lived only 21 years, Billy left a legacy that endures through time. His story has crossed generations, fueling books, films, and debates. But the truth behind the legend is even more fascinating than the fictional tales. Perhaps you have heard of Billy as a ruthless outlaw, but few know the human side of his story, a childhood marked by tragedy, the choices made under pressure, and the quest for freedom in a world that offered few chances to a poor, orphaned boy. Get ready to embark on a journey through time where we will explore the arid deserts, the noisy saloons, and the historic confrontations that shaped the trajectory of this anti-hero. If you are enjoying this fascinating story about Billy the Kid and the Old West, don't forget to give that like on the video. Your support helps us a lot to continue bringing amazing content like this. And if you aren't subscribed yet, take this opportunity to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming thrilling stories. Comment below what else you would like to see here. Now let's continue with the legend of Billy. In this journey, you will feel the adrenaline of duels at dawn, the deadly silence before an ambush, and the sound of chains breaking in one of the boldest escapes ever recorded. We will go beyond the romanticized stories, investigating the historical documents and accounts of those who crossed paths with Billy. Are you ready to learn the truth behind the legend? So stay with us until the end, because what you are about to hear may completely change the way you view one of the most intriguing names of the Old West. This is the story of Billy the Kid, and it starts now. Imagine a vast and wild territory where the laws were fragile and survival depended on courage, cunning, and often the pull of a revolver. This was the Old West, a region marked by its untamed beauty and a constant struggle between progress and chaos. In the final decades of the 19th century, the United States was in full expansion. The building of railroads, the growth of cities, and the gold rush attracted adventurers, immigrants, and opportunists. But this expansion also brought conflicts with indigenous peoples, land disputes, and the emergence of lawless towns. In most border towns, the law was fragile or non-existent. Sheriffs were few, and those that existed faced entire gangs of armed criminals. In this scenario of anarchy, heroes and villains mixed, and the line between right and wrong became thin. It was in this environment of opportunity and violence that the legends of the West were born. Men like Jesse James, Butch Cassidy, and of course, Billy the Kid, who lived on the tightrope between myth and reality. Many of these men started their lives trying to survive, but soon were consumed by fame and danger. Beyond the natural challenges of the territory, the Old West was the stage for local wars, such as the famous Lincoln County War, which pitted small farmers against wealthy businessmen. These disputes created figures like Billy the Kid, who were often as much victims as they were culprits. Violence, paradoxically, was also a form of justice for many. In a place where courts were rare, duels became a way to settle disputes, and gunslingers gained fame for their skill and courage. Meanwhile, Newspapers and pamphlets began to spread the stories of these characters across the country. Outlaws were transformed into almost mythical figures, both admired and feared, and Billy the Kid was no exception. Amid this chaotic landscape, Billy the Kid stood out. He was young, charismatic, and extremely skilled with guns, but he was also a product of his time, a boy trying to survive in a world that offered few options. Now that we understand the context that shaped the Old West, let's delve into the life of Billy the Kid. How did an orphan without prospects become one of the biggest names of this era, as fascinating as it was cruel? Before Billy the Kid became a feared and respected name in the Old West, he was just Henry McCarty, a boy born in 1859 in New York City. Who could have imagined that frail boy with bright eyes would grow up to become one of the most famous outlaws in history? Henry had a difficult childhood. At a very young age, he lost his father, and his mother, Catherine, faced serious struggles to support the family. In search of a better life, she decided to move west, bringing Henry and his brother with her. It was in the arid territory of New Mexico that Henry spent much of his youth. His mother, always seeking stability, remarried, but the new stepfather was not the man Henry had hoped for. Their relationship was tense, and the young boy soon began to spend more time on the streets than at home. Like many orphans and poor young people of the West, Henry found himself forced to fight for survival. He worked on farms, did odd jobs in exchange for food, but quickly began to get involved with the dark side of border towns. The first time Henry clashed with the law was for something relatively minor. He was accused of stealing food to survive. After that, the escalation was swift. A small theft here, a fight there, and soon his name began to appear in police records. In 1874, the death of his mother was the final blow for young Henry. Without family, support, or prospects, he was left to fend for himself. It was at this point that he began to tread the path that would transform him into the legendary Billy the Kid. Henry was small and appeared even younger than his age, which earned him the nickname Kid. He not only embraced this nickname, but transformed it into part of his identity, adding Billy and beginning to build the persona that would challenge sheriffs and captivate the popular imagination. Despite his fragile appearance, Billy had an undeniable talent. He was extremely skilled with weapons. It is said that he learned to shoot at a young age, and his agility and aim were impressive. This skill would be his main defense in a world where survival depended on who pulled the trigger the fastest. During his youth, Billy began to forge alliances with other young delinquents and to confront figures of the law. However, he also gained powerful enemies, including wealthy farmers and local authorities, who regarded him as a growing threat. Homeless, without family, and with the law increasingly close on his heels, Billy abandoned any attempt at a normal life. He transformed into a complete outlaw, living off thefts and escapes, and began to build the legend that the world would come to know as Billy the Kid. It all began with a simple, almost insignificant theft. In 1875, at 16 years old, Billy the Kid was arrested for the first time after stealing some clothes and guns from a store. For many, this would be just a youthful mistake, but for Billy, it was the beginning of a life of escapes that would mark his journey in the Wild West. Imprisoned in an improvised basement in the town of Silver City, Billy seemed doomed to serve his sentence. But the boy, still thin and underestimated by the guards, managed to escape spectacularly. With a smile on his face and the cunning that would accompany him throughout his life, he made it clear that it wouldn't be easy to contain him. The audacity of this escape caused his name to start circulating. It was uncommon for someone so young to outsmart the law with such skill. People began talking about a boy who always seemed one step ahead, and that's how the legend of Billy the Kid began to take shape. After escaping, Billy could no longer return to his hometown. He wandered through New Mexico, surviving as best he could. He worked temporarily on farms, but soon found himself involved in fights, thefts, and troubles. More and more, he was forced to follow a path of no return. It wasn't long before Billy began to get involved in shootouts. Initially, it was a matter of survival, but his speed and accuracy with a gun soon drew attention. He not only fled from the law, but also faced those who tried to capture him. The fame of Billy the Kid grew, but not always for his own deeds. The press of the time loved sensational stories, and Billy became a perfect character. Exaggerated accounts of his crimes began to appear in newspapers, further increasing his notoriety. During his travels, Billy began to form alliances with other outlaws. He became part of a group that committed small thefts and hunted for opportunities in a lawless West. Despite his youth, Billy demonstrated leadership and skill in planning his actions. Interestingly, many who crossed paths with Billy the Kid described him as charismatic and polite, the opposite of what one would expect from an outlaw. He had a knack for winning people's trust, which often facilitated his escapes and alliances. As time passed, Billy left petty thefts behind and began to engage in more serious crimes, such as robberies and deadly duels. His actions placed him directly on the radar of local sheriffs, who began to pursue him relentlessly. With each escape, with each confrontation, Billy became more than just an outlaw. He was becoming a legend. His name spread through the towns of the West, and the frail boy from New York was now known as one of the most wanted men in the territory. But this was just the first page of his story. It was the year 1878, and Lincoln County, New Mexico, was on the brink of a civil war. The dispute was fierce between two rival groups. On one side were the wealthy farmers and merchants led by James Dolan. On the other were the small cattle ranchers and independent ranchers represented by John Tunstall. Amid this scenario, Billy the Kid found his destiny. After years living as an outlaw, Billy was recruited by John Tunstall, a British farmer who saw in the young gunslinger a valuable ally. Tunstall was not just an employer, but an almost paternal figure for Billy, offering him a sense of belonging that he hadn't felt since his mother's death. Billy found in Tunstall a cause to fight for. He began working for the rancher, protecting the cattle, and serving as part of his security team. But this alliance would soon turn into something much greater when the conflict between the rival groups escalated into acts of violence. Everything changed on the day John Tunstall was brutally murdered by men connected to Dolan's group. For Billy, this was a breaking point. He swore revenge against those responsible, and his loyalty to his former employer placed him at the center of the Lincoln County War. In response to Tunstall's death, Billy joined the Regulators, a group of armed men formed to combat Dolan's allies. The Regulators sought not only justice, but also fought to protect the interests of small farmers and ranchers. Lincoln County became a battlefield. Shootouts became frequent, and Billy was at the center of many of them. In one of those confrontations, he participated in an attack against Sheriff Brady, an ally of Dolan, who ended up dead in an ambush. The actions of the Regulators drew attention not only from local authorities, but also from the press. Billy the Kid began to be portrayed as a relentless outlaw, although many viewed him as a vigilante fighting against the oppression of the wealthy. The climax of the conflict was the Battle of Lincoln, a 5-day confrontation in which the Regulators, including Billy, faced the forces of Dolan and allied sheriffs. The fight ended with many deaths and a trail of destruction, but it also marked the decline of the Regulators as an organized force. With the end of the war, the Regulators dispersed, and Billy became increasingly isolated. He continued to be pursued by authorities and by those seeking revenge for the deaths during the conflict. His life became a constant escape. The Lincoln County War was a turning point in Billy the Kid's life. It transformed him from a mere gunslinger into a symbol of resistance for some and a public enemy for others. But one thing was certain: his fame was just beginning. Billy the Kid was not only known for his skill with weapons, he also gained fame for something even more impressive: his incredible ability to escape from prisons and seemingly impossible situations. For many, he was not just an outlaw, but a master of escape. One of Billy's first notable escapes occurred when he was captured after the Lincoln County War. Imprisoned in a small local jail, he managed to escape by taking a gun from an inattentive guard. Within minutes, he was on horseback, disappearing into the horizon. What set Billy apart from other fugitives was his audacity. He didn't just escape. He did so in ways that defied logic and humiliated his captors. In one episode, he reportedly jumped out of a cell window while handcuffed and stole a horse to flee. Hey everyone, if you're enjoying this journey through the story of Billy the Kid, leave your comment below, sharing what you think about this legend of the Wild West. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay updated on more incredible stories like this one. Your opinion is very important to us, and by subscribing, you help the channel grow and bring more content to you. Let's continue with the story. In 1880, Billy was surrounded by authorities at Fort Sumner. With nowhere to go, it seemed that the siege had finally come to an end for him. However, in a surprising twist, Billy outsmarted the sheriffs by disguising himself and escaping in the middle of the night, leaving behind a trail of confusion and laughter. In 1881, Billy was finally captured by Sheriff Pat Garrett, an old acquaintance. He was taken to trial in Mesilla, where he was sentenced to hang for the death of Sheriff Brady during the Lincoln County War. The sentence was set, and many believed that this time there would be no escape. While awaiting his execution in the Lincoln jail, Billy staged his most famous escape, completely alone. He managed to free himself from his handcuffs, disarm 2 guards, and kill them in a fierce gunfight. He then mounted a stolen horse and vanished into the desert once again. This escape not only humiliated local authorities, but also made headlines in newspapers across the country. Billy the Kid was now more than just an outlaw. He was a living legend, admired for his cleverness and bravery, even by those who hunted him. After escaping from the Lincoln jail, Billy knew that his time was running out. He began living in hiding, constantly on the move, relying only on a few friends and allies. However, the hunt for him intensified. With each escape, Billy's reputation grew, but this also made his capture even more desired by authorities. He was the symbol of everything the West represented: freedom, daring, and defiance of the rules. As incredible as it was, Billy knew he couldn't run forever. The borders of the Wild West were closing in, and the net around the young gunslinger was tightening. Still, his escapes would be remembered as acts of bravery and cunning that challenged human limitations. Pat Garrett wasn't just another sheriff on Billy the Kid's trail. He had a personal connection with the outlaw. An old acquaintance of Billy, Garrett knew his habits, allies, and hideouts, making him a far greater threat than anyone else who had ever pursued him. After his spectacular escape from the Lincoln jail, Billy kept moving. He knew the hunt wouldn't cease, but his carefree and charismatic personality often led him to take risks, returning to familiar places like Fort Sumner. Despite his skill at disappearing, Billy was betrayed by someone close. An informant tipped Garrett off that the young outlaw was hiding at Fort Sumner, believing he would be safe among friends. On the night of July 14, 1881, Garrett and his men arrived at Fort Sumner. They silently infiltrated the area, hoping to catch Billy off guard. The atmosphere was tense, and Garrett knew that an opportunity like this wouldn't come again. As he moved through the interior of Pete Maxwell's house, a friend of Billy's, Garrett had an unexpected encounter. Billy, unarmed and barefoot, entered the dark room. Without realizing Garrett was there, he reportedly asked in Spanish, "¿Quién es?" "Who is it?" Without hesitation, Garrett fired, hitting Billy in the chest. The young man fell instantly, dying almost immediately. It is said that the sheriff did not celebrate his victory, knowing he had ended the life of someone who, in a way, was also a victim of the circumstances of the Wild West. The death of Billy was met with shock by the residents of Fort Sumner. Many did not believe he was really dead, and rumors began to circulate that Garrett had killed someone else and made up the story to collect the reward. At just 21 years old, Billy the Kid left a legacy that transcended his short life. His death was widely reported, and he quickly became a symbol of resistance and freedom, even among those who did not support his criminal acts. Pat Garrett spent the rest of his life defending his version of events. He even wrote a book about the capture of Billy, but faced accusations that he had acted unfairly or that he had killed Billy in an unjust ambush. Billy's death was not the end of his story, but the beginning of his legend. Reports that he had survived began to emerge, and countless people claimed to be Billy years later. He became an immortal figure, representing the indomitable spirit of the Old West. The death of Billy the Kid marked the end of his short but explosive journey in the Old West. However, his legend was just beginning. In the following decades, Billy became one of the most portrayed characters in books, films, and songs, an icon that encapsulates the essence of the Wild West. Was Billy an outlaw or a vigilante? This question continues to divide historians and admirers. For some, he was merely a criminal who stole and killed to survive. For others, he was a victim of the social injustices of his time, fighting against a system that favored the powerful. Much of what we know about Billy the Kid was shaped by the press of the time, which loved to create sensational stories. He was described as a charming and charismatic young man by some, and as a cold-blooded killer by others, showing how narratives changed according to the audience. Billy became a hero for many who lived under the oppression of large ranchers and businessmen in the West. His struggle against corrupt authorities and his ability to escape the clutches of the law transformed him into a symbol of resistance for the marginalized. Although the official version states that Pat Garrett killed Billy at Fort Sumner, various theories suggest otherwise. Some believe that Garrett killed someone else and that Billy lived the rest of his days under a new identity. These stories only reinforced his status as a myth. Over the years, various investigations have been conducted to determine if Billy really died that night, in July 1881. In 2004, a group even proposed exhuming his supposed remains for DNA analysis, but the request was denied, leaving the mystery unresolved. Since the 20th century, Billy the Kid has been a central figure in films, series, music, and even games. He appears as a hero in some narratives and as a villain in others, showing how his story can be reinterpreted from different perspectives. Although his fame is associated with guns and spectacular escapes, some stories highlight the human side of Billy. He was known for protecting friends, being loyal to his allies, and demonstrating a personal sense of justice, characteristics that made him more than just an outlaw. Billy the Kid personifies a transitional era in the Old West, when frontiers began to disappear and law and order began to dominate territories once governed by anarchy. His life reflects the conflicts and challenges of a time when survival often meant breaking the rules. More than 140 years after his death, Billy the Kid remains alive in the popular imagination. He is a reminder of a world where danger and adventure walked hand in hand, and his story continues to inspire those drawn to the indomitable spirit of the Old West. Even after his death, the mystery surrounding Billy the Kid has never faded. The question of his remains continues to be a hotly debated topic. According to accounts from the time, Billy's body was buried in the Fort Sumner Cemetery, but some doubts about his identity have never been resolved. Billy's body was buried quickly after his death. Supposedly, he would rest in a simple location, but from there, discrepancies began to arise. Over the years, various versions emerged, suggesting that the real Billy might be buried elsewhere, or even that he was never truly buried in Fort Sumner. In the years following Billy's death, the location of his grave became the subject of controversy and even looting. Various relic hunters attempted to locate Billy's remains, and even some people claiming to be his descendants became involved in the search for his body. In 1931, an excavation was conducted at the site where it was believed Billy was buried, but the results were inconclusive. The grave thought to be his was unearthed, but no traces of his identity were found. This led to further speculation about whether the true Billy was indeed there. In the following years, a series of theories arose, claiming that Billy the Kid might have escaped death and lived secretly for many years after the shootout. Some bolder versions suggest that he changed his identity and lived into the early 20th century, evading authorities and public attention. In 1950, a new attempt to resolve the mystery occurred with the exhumation of one of the bodies from the Fort Sumner Cemetery. A corpse was exhumed and identified as Billy, but the studies of the time were unable to definitively prove his true identity, leaving more questions about the real grave of Billy. In 2005, new DNA technologies were used in an attempt to resolve the issue. Scientists tried to obtain samples from the body exhumed in 1950 and compare them with DNA from known relatives of Billy the Kid. However, the process was halted due to a lack of sufficient evidence, and the mystery remained unsolved. There are even reports of people claiming to be Billy the Kid or to be his direct descendants. In 1940, a man named Ollie Reed went public claiming to be Billy, having survived the shootout. His story was never proven, but it contributed to feeding the legend. These mysteries only fuel the legendary aura surrounding Billy the Kid. The uncertainty about what happened to his body and the possibility that he lived longer than thought only reinforce the idea that he was more than an ordinary person. Billy the Kid was an idea, a figure impossible to completely unravel. With each new theory, every new clue or excavation, the name of Billy the Kid remains at the center of popular imagination. Whether his body is truly there in Fort Sumner or buried elsewhere, the legend of Billy persists, becoming an immortal part of the Old West. To this day, the myth of Billy is fueled by uncertainty, and it is this uncertainty that ensures his story will never be forgotten. Billy the Kid became a central figure in the culture of the Old West, representing the complex moral dilemmas of the time. He was both a relentless outlaw and a kind of folk hero, challenging authority and fighting against a corrupt system. This duality made him an icon that still resonates in American culture today. Billy was one of the first to solidify the image of the anti-hero, a man who, despite committing crimes, earns the sympathy of the public for his courage, resilience, and quest for justice. This type of character would later be adopted by many films, books, and even modern figures. The legacy of Billy the Kid spread throughout media, being portrayed in numerous film productions. Movies like The Westerner, 1930, Billy the Kid, 1941, and Young Billy the Kid, 1966, helped solidify his figure as the archetype of the lone gunslinger alongside other great icons of the West, such as Jesse James and Butch Cassidy. Billy the Kid also became a constant presence in folk songs and ballads of the West. Songs like Billy the Kid by Bob Dylan and other popular compositions contributed to spreading the legend of Billy, making him a mythical figure whose adventures were sung about everywhere. Over the years, the real Billy was overshadowed by the figure that history created. The true Billy the Kid was a troubled young man, but also a product of the circumstances of the Wild West, fighting for survival. The myth transformed him into an almost legendary figure whose life was filled with adventures and injustices. For many, Billy the Kid represents a symbol of rebellion, a fight against an oppressive system. He personifies the spirit of resistance of the Wild West, where justice was not always served by the hands of the authorities. This image of the lost rebel has touched the hearts of many across generations, even influencing social movements that fought against established institutions. Billy's appeal also lies in the figure of the lone gunslinger, someone who lives outside societal norms, seeking his own code of honor, whether right or wrong. This figure gained enormous popularity in Western films, where the solitary hero or villain traveled from town to town, dealing with the law and his own demons. Billy's numerous escapes fueled the popular fantasy about the invincibility of the young outlaw. His spectacular escapes, where he defied death and escaped impossible situations, created a narrative of overcoming against all odds. something that still resonates in many modern hero stories. Billy the Kid also became a fundamental part of the mythology of the Wild West. His life was marked by a series of legendary events, such as his involvement in the Lincoln County War and his escapes from authorities. Over the years, he became a symbol not only of violence, but also of the struggle for freedom in a lawless territory. Although Billy died young, his story ushered in a new era of myths of the West. His premature death only contributed to his status as a legend, creating a narrative of tragedy and bravery that would continue to be told and retold. The Old West may have ended, but the legend of Billy the Kid remains alive as one of the greatest icons of American culture. The story of Billy the Kid is one of the most fascinating and enigmatic tales of the Wild West. His short life, filled with dramatic events, marked an era where the line between good and evil was not always clear. From an unrelenting outlaw to a symbol of resistance, Billy became much more than just a simple criminal. He transformed into a legend whose legacy remains alive to this day. His premature death only fueled the myth, making him an icon of American culture and the indomitable spirit of the Wild West. The fascination with Billy the Kid goes beyond the deeds he accomplished or the crimes he committed. It lies in his ability to challenge conventions and fight against a system that did not understand him. His name echoes in songs, movies, books, and in the minds of all those who still seek to understand what the Wild West truly was. If you enjoy stories like this, about the great myths of the past and the figures who shaped our history, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Leave your like, share with your friends, and comment below what intrigues you most about the life of Billy the Kid or other historical figures you would like to see here. Your participation is very important so that we can continue exploring the legends that are still buried in time. Until the next video,